The heaviest thing I have ever felt in my life was not grief. It was not illness. It was not 62 years of accumulated worry and heartbreak and quiet loss. The heaviest thing I ever carried was the simple weight of being alive inside a body. And I had no idea I was carrying it until the moment it all lifted at once. Everything, all of it, gone in one breath, or rather, in the absence of a breath. And what replaced it was something I do not have adequate words for, except to say that light has weight too, and the weight of that light felt like being held. That is where this story begins. My name is Carol Brennan. I'm 65 years old, retired school librarian from Lexington, Kentucky, and I was declared brain dead for 44 hours. If you're new here, please subscribe. What I'm about to tell you is something I have said out loud only to the people closest to me, until now. And the reason I'm saying it here is because I believe the people who need to hear it will find it. Your subscription keeps this channel going. It keeps these stories reaching the people they're meant for. And before I go any further, I want you to drop something in the comments. I want to know this. Is there someone you've lost that you still talk to? Not out loud necessarily, just in your head, in quiet moments, still telling them things, still holding space for them. Because what Jesus showed me changes everything about what that means. And I want you to sit with that before we're done here. Now let me take you back. It was early April. I remember that because the red buds were just coming in, and I had been thinking that morning that I needed to get outside, that I'd been cooped up too long, that the winter had gone on too long. I remember the particular quality of the light through the kitchen window. I remember making tea. I remember the sound of a cardinal somewhere in the yard, and thinking, in the small, half-conscious way you think things in the morning, that I was glad to be alive. Then I was on the kitchen floor. I don't remember how I got there. What I know from the doctors is that I had an aneurysm, a brain bleed, sudden and massive, from a vessel that had been thinning for years without any symptoms that could be caught. My neighbor found me. She had come by to return a casserole dish, and she heard the cardinal too, she told me later. And then she heard the silence, and something made her knock harder than usual. The paramedics arrived 8 minutes after her call. By the time I GK the hospital, the neurological damage GK enough that the team began preparing my family for a conversation they had hoped to never have. I was declared brain dead at 4:17 in the afternoon on a Tuesday. I remained in that state for 44 hours. I want to tell you what the doctors found when I came back, because this is part of the story, the physical evidence of where I had been. When brain activity resumed, it radiologists described, quietly and with obvious discomfort, as inconsistent with the damage profile. The hemorrhage had gone severe. The areas affected should have produced specific and permanent deficits: language processing, motor function, memory. She showed my daughter the scans. She pointed to the shadows, the compromised regions. She explained, in the careful, measured language of medicine, what the damage meant. Then she showed her the follow-up imaging. The deficits that should have been there were not there. Not diminished, not present and partially recovering, not there. My neurologist used the word remarkable 4 times in a 10-minute conversation. She is not, by any account, a woman who uses words carelessly. She has since reached out to me twice, not as my physician but as a person, to ask me questions she doesn't know how to frame professionally. I don't have a medical explanation for what happened to my body. What I have is an account of where I was while my body lay in that bed and what I was shown. So let me tell you, the first thing I was aware of was the absence. Not of pain. I hadn't been in pain as far as I knew. The absence of weight. I described it already. The weight of a body, the weight of a life lived inside a body. But it was more specific than that. Every physical sensation I had accepted as normal, the low-level tension in my shoulders, the slight ache in my left knee from an old fall, the background hum of a tired digestive system, the slight pressure behind my eyes that I'd stopped registering years ago, all of it gone. And what I felt in its place was not nothing. It was a fullness that was somehow also weightlessness. Like I had been a jar of water, and the jar had simply dissolved, and I was now just the water, not held in anything, not pressing against anything. I could see, though I had no eyes. That is the best way I can say it. There was perception. There was clarity. There was a knowing where things were and what they were, an awareness, but no mechanism I could identify. No eyes tracking, no ears processing sound, just knowing. And what I knew was this: I was not in my house. I was not in a hospital. I was not in any place that belongs to this world. And I was not alone. The light arrived the way dawn arrives, not as a switch flipping, but as a gradual presence that somehow also felt instantaneous, as if it had always been there, and I had only just become able to perceive it. And standing in it, or rather, standing as a part of it, was a figure I recognized with everything I was, in a way that had nothing to do with prior image or expectation. Jesus was not how the paintings have ever shown him. I want to say that clearly. Not the stained glass, not the Sunday school illustrations, not the Renaissance canvases. What I perceived was closer to the feeling of recognizing a voice in the dark, a deep, settled certainty of who this was before any detail registered. And then, warmth. Not physical warmth, something closer to the feeling of being genuinely known by another person. The rare and specific warmth of being with someone who does not require you to perform or explain yourself. He spoke. And speaking, again, is not exactly the right word. He communicated in a way that arrived complete, the way understanding a piece of music arrives, not word by word, not sentence by sentence, but whole. The first thing he said was, "I want to show you something." And then I saw them. They came from everywhere and nowhere at once, not walking toward me, not materializing from shadows. They were simply there, the way the light was simply there, present, unmistakably real, oriented toward me in a way that made it clear they had been expecting me. The first one I recognized was my mother. She died in 2008 from a slow and difficult illness that took 2 years to finish what it started, and the last coherent conversation I had with her was about whether I had remembered to water her African violets, which I had not. She died without knowing I'd gone back and watered them after. That's the kind of grief that sits in you in an odd way. Not the sharp kind, but the small, pointy kind. The kind with no resolution. The kind where you carry a houseplant answer to a question that can't be asked anymore. She was luminous. That word sounds like a cliché, and I'm using it anyway because it is the accurate word. She was more herself than I had ever seen her. Not younger exactly, not the way people say, she looked young again. More like she had been returned to her full self, the self that illness and age and the ordinary compressions of a human life had gradually reduced. She was whole. And she was smiling at me with a familiarity so specific and so known that it hit me the way music from your childhood hits you, not just recognized but felt all the way through. She didn't speak to me, not in that moment. She simply looked at me in a way that communicated everything, that she knew me, that she had been there, that none of the things I had carried about her death were things she needed me to carry. The violet business, I understood standing there that she already knew. She'd known before I watered them, She'd known everything. That understanding landed in me like something setting down after a long flight. She was fine. Not fine as in managed or resigned. Fine as in complete. As in she was somewhere that made the word fine laughably inadequate. But that was the closest terrestrial word. And she had been there, in that fullness, the entire time I had been on earth grieving her. Then I saw my father. He had died when I was 19. A car accident, winter road, no drama beyond the fact of it. My entire adult life had been constructed around a grief I'd never fully processed, because you don't fully process losing a parent at 19. You build around it, the way a tree grows around an old fence post. The fence post is always in there. He was standing just behind my mother, and the look on his face was the look I remembered most from childhood. The specific expression he made when he was proud of something I'd done, that quiet, understated version of pride that he never made a production of. I had not seen that face in 46 years. I asked Jesus, and this is where I need to explain the conversation, because it was not like any conversation I've had on earth. It was as if I could direct a question inward, like directing attention, and the answer would come, not from outside me, but from within, the way memory arrives. A placement rather than a delivery. I asked, "Are they here for me?" And what came back was, "They have always been with you. What you are seeing now is what was always true. I want you to sit with that for a moment." Because that was not what I expected. I had expected something about heaven as a destination, a place you arrive at and find people stationed there like a welcome committee. What Jesus was showing me was not a meeting. It was a revelation of something ongoing, something that had been happening the entire time I was alive, on the other side of a veil I simply didn't have the capacity to perceive. They hadn't gathered for my arrival. They had always been gathered. The veil had just become transparent. I asked, "Why can I see them now?" And he said, "Because you asked me to show you." Not in those words, not with that request, but in every moment of your life when you turned toward rather than away. Every time you sat with something hard and stayed in it. Every time you chose love when it cost you something. Every time you held someone else's grief as carefully as your own. You were always asking, "This is the answer." Then he showed me more. There was a woman I had known in my 30s, a colleague, Janet, who had died young from cancer, leaving behind 2 small children and a husband who, last I'd heard, had eventually remarried and moved away. Janet had been the kind of person who made rooms feel better by being in them. Not loud, not performative, just warm in a way that was structural, like good lighting. She had been gone for almost 30 years, and there she was, with that exact quality, that warmth, completely intact. There was a student, this one I had not expected. A boy named Marcus, who had come through my library in the mid-1990s. A quiet kid with something difficult going on at home that I never fully knew. He had died at 27, I'd heard through the grapevine, of something I never got the details on. I had thought about him occasionally over the years, in the way you think about the ones you wonder if you helped enough. He was there. And the thing about his presence, I understood this without being told, was that his being there had something to do with the small things. The books I'd found for him, the mornings I had left him alone to read in peace and not asked questions he didn't want to answer. The time I had given him a library card without telling his mother there was an overdue book because I'd read the situation and understood it mattered. Those small things were not small. That was the understanding. None of it was small. Every act of quiet, unremarkable care, the kind that gets no acknowledgement, the kind you don't even register yourself as doing, it all went somewhere. I asked Jesus, did the small things matter? And what came back was, There are no small things. There are only things done in love and things done in something else. The first kind are permanent. Permanent. I asked, "Are there people who should be here that aren't?" A pause. And then, "There are people who were shown the door and chose not to walk through it. That is not something you were shown. What you were shown is what was chosen." I understood that this was the boundary of what I was being given, not the absence of certain people, not a catalog of who didn't make it, only what was chosen, what was present, what was full. And then he brought me back to the question I hadn't known I was carrying. He said, "When you return, and you will return, you will carry this with you, not as memory only, as knowledge in your body. And the question I want you to bring back with you is this. If you could see your life the way you are seeing it now, what would you do differently tomorrow? Not in shame, not as accusation, as a question genuinely asked, with genuine curiosity about the answer. What would you do differently?" I didn't answer out loud. I don't think out loud meant anything where I was. But the question went into me. And what came back, in the strange, complete way things arrived in that place, was something like, I would be less afraid of taking up space with love. I had spent a significant portion of my adult life making myself smaller in order to make things easier for other people. Being agreeable, smoothing things over, not saying the hard true thing when the hard true thing was what someone needed. I had called this being kind. What I saw from that vantage point was that it was often something else dressed in kind's clothing. It was fear. And what love actually looks like, what I could see it looked like from where I was standing, is larger than that, more direct, less managed. I would spend less time managing other people's comfort at the expense of what's true. That's what I would do differently. Then I returned. I have no memory of the return itself. No tunnel, no pulling sensation, no countdown. One moment I was in that light, with those people, with that conversation still reverberating through me. The next moment I was aware of a ceiling, a fluorescent light, beeping, the smell of a hospital room, and a weight settling back over me that I can only describe as familiar, not crushing, not unwelcome, but unmistakably the weight of a body and a life put back on after having been removed. My daughter was asleep in the chair beside the bed. She had been there, I later found out, for 41 of the 44 hours. She had not gone home. She had not eaten a real meal. She had sat in that chair and talked to me, out loud, in a room where the machines said I wasn't there, telling me things, updating me on small daily details the way you do when you need to believe someone can hear you. I want to tell you something about that. She could not hear anything from where I was, but it wasn't lost. That's the thing I need you to understand. None of it was lost. Every word said in love to someone who appears to be beyond receiving it, it goes somewhere. It lands somewhere. The universe is not a place where love falls through cracks. She heard me wake up before the monitors alarmed. She told me later that she heard me take a breath that sounded different, deliberate, like a decision, and she was already standing before the nurses came. I've been living with what I was shown for 3 years now. I'm not a different person in the dramatic sense that people sometimes hope for from stories like this. I didn't come back and quit my life and become a preacher. I came back as myself, Carol Brennan, retired librarian, grandmother, occasional insomniac, woman who still forgets to water her own plants sometimes. But I am different in this. I stopped being afraid of love taking up too much space. I stopped managing down what I say to people I care about. I started telling people the true thing, the kind true thing, not the managed, softened version of it. I started sitting with people's grief as if it mattered, because I know now that it does, that the sitting matters in ways neither party can see in the moment. And I stopped worrying about the people I've lost. Not because they don't matter, because they are fine, more than fine, with a completeness that makes fine sound like describing the ocean as damp. They are there, in that light, in that fullness, and they were there the whole time I was grieving them. The grief was mine, it was real, it was appropriate, but it was never the whole picture. Here is what I want to leave you with, and I want you to actually sit with this. If you could see your life right now the way I saw it from that side, if you could see the small acts of love and where they went, if you could see the weight you're carrying that is not yours to carry, if you could see the people who are already okay and have been okay all along, what would you do differently tomorrow? Not a big dramatic overhaul. I'm not asking about grand gestures. I'm asking about tomorrow morning. What would you say to someone you've been meaning to say something to? What would you let go of that you've been holding on to because letting go felt like forgetting? What would you do less fearfully? That's what Jesus asked me to bring back. Not a doctrine, not a manifesto, a question. And it is the most useful thing I've brought back with me. Drop your answer in the comments, or don't answer it there. Answer it in your own life, in your own way, in the morning. That's exactly where it belongs. If you've been here the whole way through this, I want to say thank you. I don't take it lightly that you stayed. These are not easy things to say out loud. And they're not easy things to receive either, I know that. But I believe you found this for a reason. And I believe the question that just landed in you, whatever version of it landed in you, is real and worth following. Subscribe if you're new. Share this if you know someone who needs it. Not someone who will agree with it necessarily, but someone who is carrying something heavy and could use the reminder that heavy is not forever. I'll see you in the next one.